The Bellamy at Milledgeville, community and lifestyle for the modern college student. Close to campus, fully gated, and a full-service professional staff. Come take a tour at the Bellamy or apply today at bellamymilledgeville.com.
Hello and welcome to GC360, where news comes full circle. I'm Merritt Dismuke. We bring you news from the Georgia College campus and across the Milledgeville community. For our first edition of the spring semester, we have a special panel of guests to discuss what the struggle for civil rights means for college students today. Joining us today, we have Paige Obermeyer, a junior criminal justice and sociology major. Also with us, we have Fidelis Folafak, a senior biology major. Senior Cedric Norris, Jr., a double major in philosophy and liberal studies, will be joining us shortly. Thank you all for joining us today. Thanks. We'd like to start by recalling last month's visit to campus by Dr. Bernard Lafayette, co-founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and freedom rider in the 1960s.
You probably also know Congressman John Lewis, but have you heard of his college roommate, Dr. Bernard Lafayette? Dr. Lafayette worked side by side with Dr. King during the Civil Rights Movement, marched in Selma, and held a position with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Georgia College had the pleasure of hosting Dr. Lafayette this past February for Black History Month. He held a town hall meeting on campus.
What would be some advice you would give our generation on becoming civil rights activists in the 21st century?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I couldn't wait until you asked that question. Wow. Okay. I can't do it all in one scoop, but I will give you a summary, okay? The first thing I would say is that do your research as a leader. Yeah. So the point is, we started doing the research so we understood why people behave the same way. So that background in putting things together is the most important part. That's my advice, that you do your research so you really know what's going on. Right?
Dr. Lafayette also offered words of encouragement for today's activists.
Even when things look like they are down, don't give up. You cannot achieve your goal unless you stay with it until you reach your goal.
More than 50 years after the Civil Rights Movement, Dr. Lafayette is still an optimist.
Before we get started, a word about how we plan to proceed. We're hoping for a stimulating and wide-ranging conversation. I'll ask a panelist a question. Panelist, would you please offer a thorough and concise answer? Other panelists then can jump in and respond with your ideas. I may from time to time call on one of you to address a point made by another panelist. So with that, let's get started. I was going to address the first question to Cedric, but since he's joining us shortly, I'll start with you, Paige. Paige, do you feel like Dr. Lafayette's optimism is justified even though we have seen so much violence and discrimination in the news? And are you as hopeful as Dr. Lafayette?
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely as hopeful. I mean, all this stuff is coming about, everything on the media and stuff, but I honestly just think that since like the civil rights and everything that happened is like so recent and we've been seeing change, we can continue to see change in the future.
Fidelis, do you have a point to make?
I would also say the same thing. I feel like his optimism definitely is justified. I feel like when you are taking on activism and taking on challenges, you have to be optimistic or else you're going to lose sight of why you started or you're going to lose hope. And I do think that when he says to do your research and to be able to understand why people behave the way that they do, gives us a clear insight into, you know, how people are raised and what they're, you know, basically learn in the environment that they come up in. So it helps you in your activism into how to fight against those things.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you guys are optimistic. So moving on to our second question. How do you think the work of Dr. King and the civil rights generation has shaped the struggle for civil rights today?
I think that it's been very powerful. It's been educational for everybody, because I know a lot of people in the 60s probably didn't know what was going on or anything, and now that we've seen it, we've learned about it in our textbooks, through classes and stuff like that, we're more aware of it, so it's kind of like a natural thing. I mean, we have a long way to go still, but at least there's steps in the right direction, and we're all aware.
Right.
For me, I feel like it could be a little bit of a double-edged sword, just for the fact that a lot of times in society we take the things that make us comfortable from uncomfortable situations, and we only focus on those things. And I feel like with Dr. King, there's a lot of his work that has gone, basically that people don't really take the time to study, because we focus on just certain aspects, like the nonviolence or the coming together or the I Have a Dream speech. And I feel like he spoke on so many other things, economically, speaking on government, speaking on the army and war and things like that. A lot of things that he spoke on that we really don't get to admire as much as some of the other things that we've put the spotlight on, because it's like a feel-good moment.
Yeah, I feel like I really didn't get to know about Dr. King till I was in college. I know I learned the basics of everything, the I Have a Dream speech, like you said, but I really learned about the Chicago race riots, when I was here, and that was really shocking. And that brings me to ask, do you think civil rights should be taught at a young age?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think like civil rights isn't just for the black community. I feel like it's for everybody, since everyone has encounters with race in some way, shape, or form. I feel like we should all know, because if it's kind of like how you said, if you're educated more about it in college, you're kind of like, you felt like you probably were in this bubble, and then all of a sudden when you get to college, you're like, oh shoot, like all this stuff is happening. So I feel like at a young age, if we taught it more, it would be more accepted, and it'd be more common to know about race and race relations, things like that, why like things happen to certain groups of people, why there's systematic oppression, everything like that. So yeah, I definitely think that education should be
taught early on. Yeah. Okay. So how has civil rights activism changed since the 1960s? What do you guys have to say about that? Fidelis, do you want to start?
Yeah, I will. I feel like since then, it's kind of come in waves, I would say. I feel like there are a lot of things that have gone below the surface, a lot of things that are a lot more covert and that don't happen, in the open. And so a lot of times, I feel like we may have gotten comfortable in certain environments or gotten comfortable with certain behaviors and certain things until something big happens, like, police shooting or, somebody's being discriminated against in a store or something like that. And so, I feel like civil rights and activism is a day-to-day thing. It's something that you live and breathe and, you wake up with on your mind. I'm not saying like you wake up and just, like Superman go to save the day, but, you also have to be very conscious of your environment and how those things happen on a day-to-day basis. A lot of, racism nowadays is not gonna be in your face like it was in the 1960s, for the sake of like, nowadays everybody has to be very careful of what they do and what they say. Nobody wants to get fired from their job or, wants to be outed on the internet for whatever it is, whatever, behaviors they may have. So a lot of things that people do are a lot more systematic. I mean, it's always been systematic, but we've gotten to a point where it's become a lot more systematic and less out in the open.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I would have to say it's not as looked down on, for lack of a better term, I guess, since the 1960s. Like when people go to Black Lives Matter movements or even like women's marches or stuff like that, not trying to compare them, but anything like that, any kind of activism thing, people are like, oh, that's so cool. They're not like, oh, why are you doing that? Like, that's so taboo, Yeah. It's not a taboo thing. It's very out in the open. It's very accepting. So people, I guess, they don't expect it, but people aren't discouraged, I guess.
Yeah. And I have to agree with what you said, Fidelis, about people being more careful what they say, especially with social media, and we'll cover that later. I have a few specific questions about that. But here is a third question. Dr. Lafayette said that activists should do their research to better understand why people behave the way they do. How can this apply to today? Who wants to start?
I can.
Oh, okay, Paige.
Do you want to?
I don't mind.
Okay.
I would say that he is right, but I also say, like I feel like a lot of times we put a lot of energy into trying to, I wouldn't say understand, but into trying to educate ourselves. I feel like there are a lot of things nowadays that I feel like we already kind of know, and that, you know, not to say that we should expect people to know certain things, but I feel like there are a lot of things that come with just growing up in, you know, in the United States and growing up in this kind of an environment, that certain things you do understand and certain things you do know, that, you know, racism isn't like, it's not to the point anymore where somebody has to grow up in a racist family to be racist, but it's that things have just become so normalized within like society and in the media, and you know, just your environment in itself, just in the same way that for a man growing up in society, you know, a lot of society, our language, our media, the things we engage in is very male biased. A lot of the things that we grow up being engaged in when it comes to race are very white biased. Right. So it's more of a subconscious thing that happens. And so I feel like, yes, we should take the time to do our research, and we should take the time to educate people so that they do confront those underlying biases. But at the same time, we also should take the time to change the language and change the way, you know, the representation, and change, you know, the way that people see and speak on things in society as well.
Give us some examples of that. What do you mean by that?
So like a very easy example would be when people talk about like what is the standard of beauty. You know, when you look on TV and you look in commercials, or even just the language that we use on a day-to-day basis, a lot of it is very like Eurocentric, very white-centric. Right. You know, a lot of the appeal is towards, you know, that image. Mm-hmm. And so subconsciously, a lot of us, you see this particularly with young black women, a lot of them, you know, with like what they do with their hair, or when people talk about like the use of like bleaching creams and things like that. Yes. You know, it's not that they grow up in an environment where they're being told that, oh, you have to look white to be pretty, but what they see in the media and then the language that is used in their everyday lives from their peers or just in general, you know, it kind of sets in your subconscious, and it's something that you might not think about on the front end, but you know, in the back of your head, it's like an ongoing type of thing. Yeah.
Paige, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say like that, and also just academics, like what I've seen a lot in high school and stuff, when my friends would get accepted to a really good school, and they're like, they're people of color, so they're black, they're like, oh, do you really want to go there? And like, why would you want to do that? And when I speak, I work at a restaurant, and sometimes when I speak, people are like, oh, like you're so articulate, and I'm sure you've heard that a lot. Like, yeah, they're like, oh, I guess, wow, you speak so well and stuff. So they assume that black people can't speak well, and black people aren't supposed to, and they're not articulate, and even black people are like, oh, well, you're trying to be white, trying to speak that way. So I'm black and white, just as a preface to that. So I get it from both sides, like, oh, you're trying to be too white, or like you're trying to be too black, anything like that. So it's just kind of like a disconnect, I think. And I think that what Fidelis was saying, education and just exposure would really help with that. People in smaller communities, maybe like white-dominated communities, should like go out, step out, go to a liberal arts college, or go to California or New York. Experience. Yeah, get some experience on different race relations and experiences.
Yeah. So bouncing off of that, what is it truly like to be a minority on campus?
That I would say it's tough, just because when you are the minority, there isn't much that is geared towards catering to your population. And so a lot of times, a lot of things that we do have on campus are things that have come from, you know, people having to fight years and years to get those, you know, programs or organizations to be able to be on campus or to be able to do these things. And a lot of things that we do for ourselves are done by us. And so, you know, it's not like there's like an institutional, what's the word I'm looking for?
System?
Not effort, yeah, like an institutional system to make sure that things are catered. And I mean, when you do have a majority white school, you know, usually the majority is gonna rule. That's just, you know, the way things happen. I just think that the institution and, you know, students, faculty, and staff just have to be a little bit more conscious of who else they do have on campus. So, everybody can't control who is on campus and how large their populations are, but we can control how we do cater to those communities.
Right. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I guess I would agree. And like when you're walking out and see everybody tabling, there's not really a lot of like Black organizations and stuff out tabling. It's mostly like sororities and church stuff and things that are just happening this week and everything like that. So I think you really see that on campus, especially through tabling. And the tabling culture kind of sees that too, and that's why like when early college students come by, or maybe when people of color come by, I've noticed that a lot of people tabling don't really cater their organization or anything to them. They kind of just like bow their heads. They're like, oh, they're early college, they're not part of this school, like they're not one of us,
Gotcha.
So I think that's really disheartening to see.
Yeah. So do you think specifically through Georgia College, are there any issues that the school should tackle to raise awareness about civil rights or even tackle prejudice? Do you have any ideas of anything that could be changed?
Well, I've had this discussion plenty of times with Dr. Dorman and Dr. Brooks and other administration on campus, and the one thing that I always say is I feel like the institution can only really do so much. I think it comes to a certain point where the culture of the university itself has to change. So it really comes down to the student population and the students that are in leadership positions, whether it's through SGA or their organizations or fraternities or sororities or whatever, to really push for a culture change on the campus. Because on the back end, I mean, as minority populations, we do all we can, and we try to talk to the people that we can talk to the administration, try to see what they can do. And I feel like the university administration really does a great job of trying to make sure that they are representing the minority populations on campus. Just like recently, we just broke ground for our NPHC Plaza. And so that was a really great moment for us because that's something that our alumni have been pushing for years and years now. And so I just think it just comes to a point where the student body and the student population has to recognize how to respect and understand that culture change. And, because in the future, I mean, there's gonna be more and more, underrepresented populations on campus. Right. And so, people have to get, used to that these people are here and you don't have to like it, but you have to understand how to respect it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
and we can make all the institutional changes we want, like within the school and stuff, but like you said, it is kind of down to the students. It's student to student.
Base.
And even if they make all these changes and stuff, 4 years from now, we're all not going to be here.
Right.
Hopefully I won't. But we're all not going to be here, so it really comes down to us passing it down to the freshmen, to the sophomores, and then passing it down. So kind of that like student culture, because we ourselves like make up the college.
Right.
So we have to kind of change that, and again, all about exposure.
Right, so it really comes down to the students. I respect that. So back to that with students and free speech. Free speech on college campuses has recently been featured on the news, especially conservatives arguing that liberals are trying to shut down opinions they don't like. Others argue that some views are inherently dangerous and could provoke violence. What do you guys have to say to that?
I think that the free speech stuff is sticky because yes, they, like conservative people, technically have free speech, but also I think of free speech is like things that you can say that really don't harm other people, because a lot of things, just generally speaking, that they're saying are harming people of color, are harming LGBTQ community, stuff like that. So that's kind of, in a way, like dehumanizing them, dehumanizing like their rights, stuff like that. So I don't appreciate that, but I feel like everybody should be able to say what they want to say, so we can all gain those experiences. We can all have an open mind and say, okay, that's what they're thinking. Well, let's ask why they think that, but not necessarily to shut down other people. Yes.
I would say that personally, I feel like everyone has the right to think what they want to think and to say what they want to say. And I think that what people do have to understand is that free speech doesn't equal a freedom of consequence. So, you can say what you want to say, but at the end of the day, you have to understand that there are going to be reactions to what you do say. And I think that people also have to understand, like personally, I'm not a fan of like trying to censor somebody, no matter what they think, because at the end of the day, you censor people because you don't agree with their opinion, there's the things that they're just going to internalize, and it's going to manifest in other ways, and a lot of times it's going to manifest in a lot more violent ways. And so I think that, you know, allowing people to have the right to say what they want to say gives us, one, a chance to be able to identify the mindsets that exist on our campus, and two, be able to work through how to like be able to coexist, or how to kind of, you know, coach people through being able to be culturally sensitive to other people's ideas and other people's opinions without it manifesting in other more volatile ways.
Right.
Yeah.
I was about to say, in society today, many are combative, whether it be on social media or whether it be on a college campus. Like recently, University of California, Berkeley, somebody was punched in the face for expressing their views. So it's hard to find the line between what you say and what you don't say.
Right.
But with that, do you believe the message of nonviolence still resonates today?
I think that's, I think that it does, but I also think that I don't feel like it resonates any more or less today than it did back then, because it wasn't the main idea. You know, I feel like it was what was, of course, taken up by the media and, you know, pushed because it was the favorable idea. But there were other, you know, ideas that people had and other movements that people were a part of. So I do feel like today, I think what we get today with the coming of the internet and social media is that people whose ideas aren't being carried by the media, they're able to carry those ideas using other forms of media, such as the internet and social media, so that we do see a more diverse and wider range of not just nonviolence, but people also using like economic-based ideologies, like land-based ideologies, people who are going about it in different ways. We're able to see that and being able to understand that these ideas have always existed, but you know, one was always just more pushed than the other one.
Right. Going off that, on social media, how big of a role does it play in activism, whether it be the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter movement? Those are some examples. How big of a role does social media play in all that?
I think it plays a really big role. It spreads awareness. Like, I'm on Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all of the above. And I honestly wouldn't know as much as I do without those. You know, everyone's retweeting stuff like that. Everyone's saying like, oh, there's a march happening in February or something like that. So I think that they definitely spread awareness, and I think that's a good thing, because spreading awareness creates change, and the more people know about something, the more we can enact laws to pass to, I guess, have groups, or people of color groups and stuff not as discriminated against.
Right, or misrepresented.
Yeah, I think social media does do a good job of raising awareness, but also like awareness is not the means to an end. So, you know, it does a good job of letting people know about what's going on and informing people, but I do feel like it doesn't accomplish the goal of, you know, getting people to get up and get out and do something. I feel like people get comfortable behind a screen. People get comfortable just tweeting things or just posting things on social media and thinking that a change is gonna come out of that. But at the end of the day, there has to be some groundwork that is done. So I think social media is the tool for awareness and the tool for spreading information. But at the end of the day, like, we still have to get up and get out there and do the work that's needed.
Yeah.
Do you think social media is a bit harmful in a way to the activism, because so many people can state their opinions and degrade others? Do you think that it has any negative side of helping promote such Black Lives Matter or even other movements?
I think the downfall that I will say about social media, like I mentioned before, is that everybody doesn't easily feel empowered. So like, you can know a lot of things and you can know about all the movements and all the information about them, but unless you're willing to, like I said, get up from behind your phone and go out and do the work that is required, at the end of the day, you know, you don't really accomplish much by just knowing what you know.
Right. So moving on, what is your opinion on the Jussie Smollett case in today's media? He's now been accused of faking a racially motivated attack on him in an effort to get more pay for the role he had been playing in the Empire show on TV?
I think that it really shows through my Facebook feed and stuff. I'm Facebook friends with a lot of like my white middle upper class family members, and they're like, oh, like this is what I guess black people do and like stuff like this. So it makes me so mad because it shows that like in white society, when one black person does something, it just speaks down to all black people, and like they're all bad and like they all mean this and they do like this and that and stuff. So I think that it was wrong and stuff, but we can't just associate race with something like
with
that.
one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like she said, it is interesting that, you know, people take that one thing and try to paint a whole group of people to say that, you know, this is what we do and whatever. Because I mean, throughout history, there is a long history of, you know, on the other side of white people staging or, you know, lying or speaking falsehoods about, you know, being attacked by black people, and those people end up going to jail or dead, or, you know, like we see with a lot of situations with police shootings, with them stating false information that has led them to kill black people unjustly. So, you know, it's like what he did is unacceptable, and, you know, it wasn't the right thing to do. But at the same time, I think that it's a chance for the nation as a whole to be reflective on the history when it's flipped on the other side.
Right.
Yeah,
You know
he should
what I'm
be
saying?
held accountable, but that shouldn't discredit all other black people.
Right.
Because like you said, if it was a white guy, the headline wouldn't read like white, but his headline reads black, because we have such invisible whiteness in society. We don't really see white, but we definitely see color.
Right. And what do y'all think of when people say they don't see color? Do you think that's kind
I
of
think
a
that's
true
so
statement?
silly. Everybody
Yeah.
sees color.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just people like white privilege trying to say like, oh, I have black friends. Like, I'm not racist, I swear.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
that's what I
don't-
get from that.
Yeah, I feel like I think people have like internalized the idea that to be able to see color is a negative thing in itself, which it isn't. You know, being able to recognize differences between people is not a bad thing. I think where the negative comes in is how you associate those differences and to what, you know, the attributes that you associate to those differences. So I think that for people to say that they don't see color is a way for them to shy away from recognizing that people with differences are treated in different ways. So
Yeah. And that erases like all the history that people of color have gone through. That's like so disrespectful. It's like, oh, I don't see color.
Right. So what civil rights issues do you think are not well understood enough at Georgia College? Do you understand, like,
Say all of them.
you can say all of them?
well, I would say when I first got here as a student, I've been on this campus since I was a freshman in high school. I did my dual enrollment here, and I've been I'm a strong advocate for different civil rights issues and things like that. So when I got on campus, I was involved with a lot of things, and I feel like I don't think that is that people don't understand. I think that there's just a level of just not caring, because like I said, like a majority of people here are probably not affected by these issues, and so they have a way of, you know, like they can not have to deal with it. And when you really don't have to deal with something, like how much can you really care about it? So I don't think it's that they don't understand or don't know, but it's like they just you can't really care about it. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Fidelis, for that.
No problem.
Panelists, thank you so much for those insightful comments. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back.
The Bellamy at Milledgeville, community and lifestyle for the modern college student. Close to campus, fully gated, and a full-service professional staff. Come take a tour at the Bellamy or apply today at bellamymilledgeville.com.
In the small town of Elmira, New York, a boy was born into an all-American family. The odds of him achieving his dream in the fashion industry? 1 in 23 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 68. I am Tommy Hilfiger, and my family is affected by autism. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs.
Listen now, can you hear the bluebirds? Oh, look up now, can you feel the sun? Can you feel the sun?
Welcome back to this special edition of GC360. We're talking to three special guests, well, two today, about issues surrounding civil rights, Paige Overmeyer and Fidelis Folafak. Let's get back to our questions. All right, so moving forward, how can you get students here to become more active in promoting causes they believe in?
I would say they can be more active just by joining clubs. Like it starts there, it starts with that awareness, joining any club in the hub. If they've never been to the hub, I think that's a red flag. That's a good first step. Just talking to other people, talking to people of color, not finding every black person they know and saying, how have you experienced racism? Like, what are your experiences like? Not that direct, but just kind of like listen to people. I think that everybody wants to be heard, including the black community and the white community. Everyone wants their voices to be heard. They want their experiences shared. So just kind of like mingling with other people, understanding them, listening to them.
Right.
I think there has to be a passion behind it, and I think people have to feel like they do have a space to make sure that these things are heard. Like I said, when I first got on campus, I was very heavily involved with doing different programs that, like, it would just be me and another student, and we would just like reserve a room in A&S and just put on like a program to talk about issues that, you know, we felt were pressing, and, you know, we would have great turnout. So I think that there are people out here that are ready to hear you out, you know, whatever your concerns or whatever your issues are. I think you just have to have the confidence and the passion behind it to be able to step out there and make these ideas heard.
Right. Based off that, do you think students are too apathetic towards the civil rights movement? They kind of turned a blind eye, especially at GCSU?
Yeah, I feel like, you know, with the whole idea of like us living in like a post-racial society, and you know, people feeling like, I think people over-exaggerate how much things have changed, and so that kind of has made us a little bit too comfortable, like I said, in the positions that we're in. So I do feel like a lot of times we do kind of turn a blind eye or become a little apathetic to these issues.
Yep.
Okay, well, speaking of, how did you really start getting involved in clubs here? Did you say you went to the hub and that's how you really met like your niche, and you found, you know, students really active in getting civil rights out into the community?
I would say I didn't start at the hub. I wish I had. I started in SGA, and through that I've gained connections through other people who've been in ambassadors, who have worked at the hub in the cultural center, things like that. And then I joined BSA, Black Student Alliance, and so yeah, through those I've kind of gained like experiences and knowledge on different communities and their experiences, throughout campus.
Yeah.
I would say for me, through a lot of mentors that I had on campus. When I got on campus, I had a lot of different faculty and staff that kind of had mentored me in high school. And so when I got here, they kind of pointed me in the direction of different organizations and clubs. And I had a lot of mentors who are now my fraternity brothers. So knowing them through high school and them kind of mentoring me, you know, when I came to college, they were also able to like help me find what kind of organizations and clubs that I want to be a part of.
Right. Do you think Black Greek life is represented enough at GCSU? No?
No, not at all.
Definitely not. I would say, and it goes back to just representation in general, because, I mean, you can't really have Black Greek life if you don't have Black people.
Right.
You know, so it's definitely a tough situation with us trying to working hard to keep it alive, because when you don't have, we're at an institution that isn't really privy to that culture, and so a lot of things that we do and a lot of events that we put on are very cultural based because our organizations are very cultural based. And so, like I said, when people just don't understand these things, or these are not issues that they really have to deal with, you know, they're just not, it's not something that they're gonna go out of their way to make an effort to understand. And so that's why, like, I feel like the representation and just the way that it's seen on campus, I feel like that's the reason why it's just the lack of representation overall kind of trickles down into how, you know, Black Greek life and just other minority organizations and how their representation is on campus.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like that, like the numbers for that say a lot because there are, I think, over 1,000, maybe like 1,400. Yeah, sorry, I don't even know the numbers, but in Panhellenic and IFC, and then in PHC, there's what, like less than 10 of y'all?
Yeah.
Wow. Exactly. So I feel, or I hope that this semester sort of bridges the gap at least a little bit more,
right.
because our sororities know a little more about NPHC after the chili cook-off and the plaza and stuff opening and stuff, but I definitely think that it's going to be a while until they're seen equally, especially on campus. Like, again, through tabling and stuff, you only see sororities tabling for their events, fundraising, things like that.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I would say, like, with that, you know, because they have more members, they're able to be more places at once. Whereas, you know, some of us are, you know, chapters of 2 or 1, so we can't, you know, be everywhere. We can't have class and then try to run out the table at the same time, you know, so.
It's really about numbers.
Yeah, it's really about numbers
involved.
and having people involved.
But I think that could also be a strength because I, for one, in my sorority, I've tried to mobilize and help everybody understand NPHC, the community, their plaza, educate them on like what NPHC is and why we do step shows, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I feel like it could also be sort of a strength because you have all these women who, not that they don't want to know, but they don't know and they don't have any avenues to know more about NPHC. So just educating them more on that helps.
Right. Okay. Well, on a broader scope, what are the biggest challenges and issues you see facing the struggle for civil rights today? Fidelis, do you want to start?
Sure. I heard a really interesting quote the other day, and I believe it was by Angela Davis. I hope I'm not quoting that wrong. But the quote was that she said, you know, we set out for freedom and settled for civil rights. And that kind of resonated with me because, you know, when you kind of think about all the things that have happened to Black people in the past and to other minority communities, a lot of it were violations of our human rights. You know, when you think about civil rights, you think about the rights that come with living under, you know, the governance of a certain country. But, you know, when you think about human rights, these are the rights that you're born with, you know, the freedom to be able to live without hindrance and, you know, things like slavery and, you know, like lynchings and police killings and things like that. Those are really human rights violations, you know, before we really even get down to like voting rights are a civil rights violation. But like, you know, when people's lives are being put in danger, that's more human rights than civil rights. And so I feel like when she said that, it's very true. Like, we settled for civil rights and we still even haven't began to really dig into the issues of the human rights violations that have gone on. Right. And so I think the struggle that we face today is having to pull back a little bit and say, okay, let's address the issues of the human rights violations first, and then we can talk about civil rights.
Right.
So.
Okay. Now, do you think media coverage has covered enough of these issues, whether it be too much or too little or just right?
I don't know. I feel like it could go both ways. Sometimes I'm like, they're covering this too much, as in we're seeing it so much, we're like desensitized to it, I guess. So we're like, oh, like
one story blows up.
Yeah,
and
like
that's it.
I guess just like Black people are going through this, like, yeah, I know, and it gets pushed in the back of your mind. Same with like the use of the word racist. Everyone's like, oh, don't say that, that's racist. And we're using the word racist so much that it kind of like I don't know the right word for it, but it just doesn't
bring it back to its original root term.
We're using it so much that it's kind of just like, oh, that's racist, like in passing, stuff like that. So
and in jokes too.
So I think that media could do more to like, I guess, differentiate the different problems that people of oppressed groups face. But I think that certain things like mass incarceration and like, oh, this police officer shot a black guy, stuff like that, that kind of gets like in the back of our minds so much that we're kind of like, oh, that happens so often that it's kind of nothing anymore.
Right.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, with the media it's kind of tricky because, you know, they're gonna cover the things that is gonna get people to watch the news. So of course, you know, they're gonna cover things that have a lot of shock value, but, you know, behind the curtain of like the police killings and behind the curtain of, like she said, you know, the little racist stuff that happens, you know, there are a lot more pressing issues that the media is not going to cover because they don't have as much shock value.
Right.
You know, so, you know, things like, to this day, like economic discriminations that still happen to this day that are leaving so many families impoverished. You know, that's not something that you hear about a lot on the media, but it's still happening. And so, you know, while they might choose to cover, you know, a police killing every so often, the other things that happen on a daily basis are really not being talked about.
Right.
To the point where we can really find solutions for these issues.
Right. Well, thank you, Fidelis. That's our last question today. Thanks so much, you guys, for coming to the show. That brings us to the end of the panel. Thank you so much, Paige Overmeyer and Fidelis Folefak, for being here today and offering your insights on the ongoing struggle for civil rights. That's all for this edition of GC360. When we're not on air, we keep you up to date on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram feeds. I'm Merritt Dismuke, always available to you, GC360, where news comes full circle.